And yes, we are live and in person wherever we are, you and me, and the special guest for today. Although, if you are watching this, you know who that is, Dan Moody. Welcome to Riffing with Ryan. I am Ryan Erickson, your humbly occasional host, maybe. And I'm here with a new series of videos. We had done several, I think 5, around the theme of no such thing as an agile coach. And there's varying degrees of conversations that emerged from that theme and have been emerging over time on LinkedIn. And after that, I got the feeling that after a break, it was time to invite what's next. And the hope is that through a series of conversations, yesterday with Marcelo Lopez, today with Dan Moody, who's here, and there's some few other conversations happening, and as many will happen into the future, I hope will get us further along the path of achieving consilience in the Agile coaching community. So without further ado, I will bring onto the stage the guest and star of the show today, Dan Moody. Hello, Dan.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Would you mind taking a moment or two before I ask the question of the day? Say who you are, why are you here, and what do you want people to know about you?
Yeah, so why am I here? I guess a little background. I'll start with the most interesting thing about me is I started out as a chef. So I went to culinary school and I worked in professional kitchens. And that's always fun. I've actually done things with clients where I had a VP who had a great kitchen because someone who worked in the restaurant industry had owned his house before him. And he did a team meeting there, and I cooked at his house and did a workshop at his house. It was a good time. So that can come in handy. But for the past, there's a whole path from how did I go from being a chef to doing agile coaching, and there's a whole story behind that. But that'll take a while. For the past decade, I've been agile coaching. Actually, a little over a decade, and that started because I was at a financial firm running a product that helped companies track their equity compensation. And I, a buddy of mine who worked at a company that I worked at right out of college, he was heading up a product at a company where they, as a spitball idea with the CEO one day and the CEO's son, they were like, oh, what if we could sell a car? Because they were in a car-related industry. I wonder if we could sell cars without human interaction. And a year later, they sold their first car without human interaction, and that company now is spun off separate from the parent company, and it's called Carvana. So my friend Adam, I'm like, Adam, how in God's name do you go from we're spitballing an idea to we've sold a car and I spend $8 million and I get a radio button on a web page? This is ridiculous. How, what's the difference? And he told me about this agile thing, and I read up about it. I'm like, God, that sounds like what you and I used to do. Now, granted, we were working sometimes literally all night long. And I was coding and he was testing and we were solving customer problems, and I was working directly with customers and getting feedback. And this is just how we did it. We were at a startup and we were solving problems that people hadn't solved before, and we were just doing cool stuff and solving customer problems. And I was like, well, that agile thing sounds a lot like what we did that was super fun and cool and worked really well. So why don't we do that? Why are we doing all this phase gated stuff of writing 300-page documents, which was my life, and going through them line by line with developers? Why don't we just, instead of spending 4 or 5 hours a day on conference calls, sharing a screen, going through these documents, why don't we actually just spend that time that we were doing that and build something and look at and see if it does what we want? That makes so much more sense to me. Anyway, so we moved that way, and then I just kind of fell in love with that process of helping companies go that direction and move to coaching. That's what I've been doing for the past decade in various forms within companies and as a consultant.
And that goes right into the no mystery question. What on earth is an agile coach?
What's funny about that is that when I started out doing it, I would have friends ask what I did, or I'd meet people and I'd say I'm an agile coach, and they'd go like what? You're a what? Um, and sometimes I would explain it as like, I'm kind of like a psychologist for developers. But and I was joking back then. And it's still, there's some truth. I mean, there's some truth to that. Anyway. But these days, if you say, like, I met somebody a couple of years back, and she's like, oh, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm an agile coach. She's like, oh, you're an agile coach. Okay, I know what that is. Like, I have one of those at my company. So it changed in the span of 7-ish years from like, I don't know what that is. I looked at with deer in headlights to, oh, I know what that is. I have some idea in my head what that is because I've encountered those types of people. So to Marcelo's point in Enneagram and looking at the use of the word, it certainly has kicked off. And there's a lot of people that use that word. So my answer is, so what is an agile coach? I think we help. The way I describe it is I help companies get out of their own way. So I explain like my comeuppance in the world of agile and how I came to it. Like I did something that worked in a startup. I worked at a big company and it wasn't working. And I felt like we were putting our own barriers in our way. Just silly things like, oh, well, this is just how we do it. And this is how project management works. And we're just going to do all these things. And so that's how I view it, is I'm helping companies get out of their own way and achieve better outcomes and deliver things that customers want instead of delivering specifications, like actually understanding what customers want and delivering things that have value. And I approach it from a product perspective because though I did do some coding, my background in software development is predominantly within the product management side and not in the coding hands-on keyboard thing.
Okay. Well, we're going to cut that off at some point. I'll share that in Marcelo's burst from yesterday when we go. And so now the thought is, okay, so this conversation has been happening in public for a while, the last several months. And my curiosity has been, there's been somewhat of a lack of clarity on it. If this is nothing, right? If this thing doesn't exist, that we talked about, if it doesn't exist, well, then what the hell are all these people doing out there and getting paid X hundreds of dollars an hour and doing training and all that stuff? And then, okay, if that's not it, why? What? So it kind of poked me the way. So how did it poke you right at the beginning? And what was your initial gut feeling when you heard that? You don't exist, Dan.
Yeah. I think what struck me is I think the thing that really struck a bone with me, is when I heard people decrying, quote unquote, life coaching. Because I think, so I was actually in that camp. So I worked at probably some of the, if you talk about prestigious agile coaching companies, I worked for Davis-Base, I worked for Solutions IQ. Prior to the acquisition by Accenture, and then again after. And so I have worked with some of the brightest minds in this field, and who have achieved some great things with some big companies. And so I've seen that world. And what I noted in that world is like there was a push. It was probably my years are getting, so it's probably about 8 years ago. 7 years ago, that there was a big push within the folks at Solutions IQ, Accenture, some of the more forward-thinking coaches. They started taking ORSC. They started going to ORSC cohorts and stuff. And I was actually leading a team of coaches at a very big client, Fortune 50, and there was a coach who, and I've told the story. I don't name him. I don't mean to shame him. Like, these things happen. I've been guilty of some of such things, but he was in a coaching conversation, after having gone through one of these programs, and the client came to me because I was leading, I was the lead. And so they're like, so this coach, was having this conversation, and the person he was talking to started talking about postpartum depression, and there were tears. And it was like, God, what the hell does that have to do? Like, why in God's name were you talking about postpartum? Like, how did this come up? Like, I'm just thinking, like, why on earth are we talking about, we're at work, why are we talking about this thing? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so I think my thought at the time was like, oh, we're going into like, people they're thinking they're therapists and they're going in, it's like that's not our role. And I kind of eschewed this whole notion of coaching. Oh wait, did I freeze or you froze for me? But, so I kind of set it to the side and thought these people are wacko. It doesn't make any sense. This is not our job. And then I struggled getting results as someone that was trying to help people, in large part because of how I showed up and not understanding some of the language that I used. And there's a whole story behind that. And
that others did not understand the language you were using. It was difficult to communicate with them. And that was
no, it was that the language that I was using, I didn't understand that the language. I was very much like I heard in the conversation with Priscilla where I chimed in comments and I said, you can be truthful and you can be factful and you can be all of those things and be kind. And there were things I was saying that I didn't recognize were not kind. I just thought they were true, right? I just thought from my perspective, well, this thing is true. Like, why can't I say it? I know like people might get offended. It doesn't matter whether I think it's true or not. The fact is that it offended people. And there were many examples and I don't know what they are, couldn't give them. And so I found that going through a cohort program myself, where I started learning about these things and learning about professional coaching, which I prefer to life coaching because I'm not there. Like, my job isn't to coach you on your life. I don't like outside of work. My job isn't to work with you about your personal stuff. It's about your work life. And so when I went through it, go ahead.
I want to pop right in. Okay. So what was your job? What was your job?
When?
At that point on that client, because that's part of this whole thing, that again, the folks out there in the field who are, whatever, charlatans or overstepping the bounds, Dunning-Kruger syndrome, blah, 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 that they don't understand that they are being hired and paid by a company to do this thing, and that is this thing, and coaching comes in the middle of it. So I'm sorry, but pop you in there, but I wanted to get there.
I think there's a disconnect. Even I'm trying to get my camera's weird. Sorry. I'm at a weird location for people who can't tell. My internet went out. So I think there's a disconnect between even clients and the coaches in terms of what they hired you for. I don't think we actually agree. Something struck a chord with me. Marty Kagan wrote a post about like transformation failures, and it was sort of like not like one of the things that he cited was like, this isn't easy, and you're going to have to do things that are hard and that you may not even want to do, and so like not setting that up front is something that he posted, or he said it was like a regret of not making that clear. In professional coaching, we might call that contracting, right? And so not going through that step of like, okay, I know you want this thing. And an example I give is I had a recent client who, they wanted to ostensibly set up a portfolio, but the problem was the team that was working there just was so dysfunctional that was actually the problem. You could set up the most perfect portfolio in the world, and the way they operate was so dysfunctional that the perfect process wouldn't have fixed it. So what they actually, their outcome, to get to their outcome, you needed to help the people.
Your sponsor in that case was open to that truth telling, that you're saying, hey, that you gave them that message that, okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, briefly. But then, we got into the hard work of, okay, now we're going to address that stuff. And that stuff, it's sort of like when you go to a chiropractor, right? Like I had a great chiropractor who, when I had an acute issue, and he says, look, you're going, and this is the part that I think Marty says that he didn't do well, and I think I haven't done well. He's like, this is going to hurt. And in fact, after the first few sessions, you're probably going to hurt more. That doesn't mean it's not working. It means we're actually doing the right things, but you have to understand it's going to hurt more at first, and then it's going to get better. So in this particular case, we got to the hurt more phase, and there was sort of a minor mutiny, and that ended that. But
a mutiny of the authorized folks at
of the
in the
team
upper
that
echelon.
reported
Oh,
to the
the
sponsor.
team.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I got scapegoated for some things too. But anyway, that's a whole separate story.
Yeah.
But so what are we there to do? I think I had prior to going through any kind of professional coaching type training and understanding it and seeing it, I had an opinion very much like I hear coming out of some of the people in this conversation of you have to be an expert in something about like whether it's product or development or something like that, and you have to understand the process and you have to go to delivery. The problem is that you're dealing with people, and so you can be as expert as you want as that in that. And if you come off like an asshole because you are coming off as an arrogant guy that knows all the things, there's a context there. And it kind of goes to, I posted on LinkedIn the other day, I bastardized a Ben Franklin quote. So Ben Franklin says, tell me, what is it? Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. And so I said, when it comes to change, it's tell me and I resist, motivate me and I acquiesce, and involve me and, I change. And so we're dealing with people, and there's a culture that exists. And so you have to understand those things, and you have to understand the system that you're working in.
Yeah.
And so this goes beyond, that goes well beyond an expertise in I understand how to do software development, because I can understand that all day long. But something that works at, say, Red Hat, I listened to a talk recently about a Red Hat transformation, and Red Hat has a very strong culture of open source. So the way they went about it was they embraced that open source culture, and they crowdsourced how they were going to go about this. And they had, they gave ownership to people, and they crowdsourced it, and they went forward that way. And it worked very well there. Try that at some place like, say, American Express. It wouldn't work very well. And so if I had, imagine I went into American Express, where I work, right? And I said, I know the answer. I'm the agile expert. We're going to do it this way. They did it over at Red Hat, and it worked well for them, and they open sourced it. It would fail. And so,
and I would imagine that depending on the level of person you're talking with in the domination hierarchy, that they would have kicked you out of the room, possibly. And this also brings up another thing for me, is that and I don't have people like in my ear or my community that I'm saying, oh, I did this, that, or the other. I mean, I got a lot of anecdotes, and I kind of want to bounce that off people who are actually there, that there are some in this domain, in this practice of agile coaching, if it exists, that believe they have a mandate, or they have the credential or whatever to do organizational design, or that they have this domain expertise in organizational change. And when there is an actual academic discipline, there is a whole field related to that. And what are you thinking if you, as even an enterprise agile coach, right, go in and say, hey, I want to transform. I want to transform your organization, or even if I want to help you transform this organization. Where is the credential? Where's that trust? I don't know. Have you encountered that? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, and that's why I think the skill of coaching, right? I don't think that my job is not to be a quote unquote life coach and to come in and talk about your outside of work life. But my job is to do a lot of the things that they talk about in coaching, of holding a mirror, of looking at being an observer and being a bystander, and helping to people to see the things that maybe are uncomfortable for them to see, or that they ignore, or that maybe my status as an outsider, right, as a consultant, gives me the ability to maybe say some things that other people don't get to say. And so my job is to help you think through it. And yes, I have some very strong opinions and experience in how software development works very well. I mean, the company I started at out of college sold to a big bank for millions of dollars, and I think I was employee number 6 or 7. I was written into the acquisition. Like, I personally, my name was in the acquisition contract of, like, this person has to come along. And 10, 11 years later, I was at some conference, and some young college kid was working at this company that had been acquired. And he's like, your name is still all over everything in the code. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, it shouldn't be. I mean, that was first, I'm not a developer by trade, and that was so long ago, it should have been rewritten. But the point, I have some very strong, so to the point of, oh, well, you do these coachy things, so you don't know. I have very strong opinions about how you should do things. Yeah. But I also don't know your context. So my job is to bring that expertise of, I know things that have worked. I know patterns that have worked elsewhere. I've read up on those things. I understand them. I've seen them at multiple companies. But I don't come in with the arrogance that I know what is going to work for you specifically. Right. So there's a lot of investigation and asking questions. And then it's also, okay, maybe it might work here, but maybe you're unwilling. Maybe you don't have the political capital. Maybe you're just unwilling to do the thing. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe you say, as I heard from my last client, we're just not ready to be that naked. Okay.
Thanks for letting me know. Yeah. Right. And so transparency, inspection, and adaptation is kind of out the door if someone doesn't want to, be transparent and inspected, Yeah.
And so I think that skill, I think I wouldn't put someone that has no expertise in software development and say, okay, you're an agile coach just because you know these coaching skills. Like, I wouldn't do it. I think you need to have a knowledge, whether it's in a technical space, like you were a developer, or you were in product, or even if you were in project management, you were in some form of, like, if you were around the product development process and you understand how to help companies get out of their own way and deliver better things to people. I think you can add value there, but I think the point is that you work in order for it to be sustaining. Those people have to change. And I'll tell you, I have a podcast. I won't plug it here, but I have a podcast, and we recorded something last Sunday with this guy.
Your podcast, I have the playlist, the No Such Thing playlist. Your podcast is in it, so I can plug my channel, and it will plug yours as well. So you feel free.
Oh, nice. A couple guys and I started a podcast called Flane, and it ties to French. I won't get into what it is, but we invited this guy on. His name is Sal Nassim. He's in the UK, and he deals with culture stuff, some DEI type stuff. He worked for the Metropolitan Police under mandate from the, like, a legal mandate of, there's like racism, misogyny. There's like these problems in the Metropolitan Police Force, and they don't have a choice. They must change. And we had an interesting conversation. We haven't aired this episode yet, so I won't spoil too much of it, but it was a really interesting conversation because there is that mandate, but the organization of the Metropolitan Police, even though there's the mandate from the law, like there is binding, you have to change. That you don't get a choice in this.
In order for it to be lasting. Go ahead. I'm sorry. The system has to change. I mean, the people, that's right. Their behavior will change if the system changes, right?
That's right. The people, if all they're doing is going along with it because they've got a metaphorical gun to their head, like, okay, their behaviors might change in the short term because they need, like, there might be legal consequences if they don't change. But long term, those things, nobody's actually changed. And so, I could come in and tell you, do this, do that, and I could change. Like, I could put in a great portfolio, and I could set up all these structures, and I could set up them. But if people don't believe in it and they haven't changed and they don't internalize up here, it's that whole thing about involve me and I change. If I'm just telling you what to do and I'm setting up the processes, this is the complaint about SAFE, right? Is it's a framework that you just come in and you just you say, do all these things. Well, all those things might be great. I mean, they've been stolen from, none of them are deemed. They've been stolen from all over the damn place. And the patterns, they work in certain contexts. Does that mean I need to do all of them and I need to do them exactly as described in that framework at my company? No, it doesn't mean that. Just like the things I think will work as a coach, as someone who's been through it, I would be extremely arrogant to walk in and say, oh yeah, I worked in product at a couple companies, and I've seen a bunch of different companies. I know exactly what's going to work here for you in your context with your people and your culture. There's no way I can know that. I just can't. So do I have to have domain expertise about product or tech? Absolutely. I think that's table stakes. But I have to come in with an attitude of I don't have the answers, and my job is to help solve the problems with you. I'm going to walk side by side with you, and we're going to solve the problems together. But you need to be an active participant, and I'm not going to hand you a deck and a 50-page PowerPoint deck that some scrubs right out of college just produced and spent hours doing, and leave you with a pretty PowerPoint deck that says go do these things. No, I'm going to work with you.
Playbook? Are you talking about a playbook or something like that? Maybe, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, every Deloitte or PwC or Accenture engagement ends with here's our PowerPoint deck or decks that we did. This shows our values. Here's all the decks you get. And I don't operate that way, because my job isn't to produce decks. My job is to produce change, and change isn't produced through giving you a deck.
As much as I would like to go on for another hour, I have to hold myself back and ask you. This is so cool. Ask you the final question. So, my desire is to create a safe, brave, strong space for dangerous conversations. Okay. Yeah. So what is the dangerous conversation you think is not happening now that could be supported in that kind of space?
I mean, I kind of wrote a post about it called "The Arrogance of Agile Coaching," and I believe that, like I said, I think there are people involved in this conversation that you've been hosting that have that level of arrogance, and I think that when I look at, I think I've shared with you, a friend of mine went to Agile 2023, and they had some word cloud generated thing about like what comes to mind when you think of an Agile coach, and I think the big word in the middle is arrogant, and there's all these words. None of them are good. I mean, they're all pejorative. They are very not good words about what a coach is. And so I think there's a perception of Agile coaches that they are just these overpaid, theoretical blowhards that come in and just tell you what to do. And I think that doesn't work. If I put up my hand, I don't get resistance. I don't get, the resistance comes when I start pushing. If I have two hands together, right, the resistance doesn't come until someone starts pushing, and then there's resistance. So I think that the dangerous conversation is, how do we change the perception that Agile coaches are theoretical, arrogant blowhards that come and tell you what to do, and what value does an Agile coach offer? And I think that in order to do that, I think there are some folks that have to come off a very rigid, in their mind, like they have a very rigid definition of this is an Agile coach. I don't think it's going to be rigid. I think it's going to look. If I have a hammer, I can have a rubber mallet, which is a form of a hammer, or I could have a masonry hammer, or I could have there's all sorts of different hammers. They're all hammers. They all have the same end purpose. Like, they want to transfer force from my swinging hand to an object. I think Agile coaching is going to be broader than some people want. Like, there's lots of things in it. But like Kent Beck talks about paint trip people. I've gone through life, and as I've encountered subjects that I find interesting, I go deep in them until I stop being interested and I go to the next thing. So I have lots of different interests, but my interests are not the same as somebody else's. And my interests alone don't solve the problem. So anyway, long-winded answer. I know I just talk about these things so that it's interesting to me, but I think that the dangerous conversation to me is like, how do we remove the arrogance from Agile coaching, and how do we change the perception that Agile coaches are theoretical blowhards that are overpaid and can't actually deliver value?
And all they do is play the penny game or the marshmallow game or paper airplanes. And some folks have no quarter for games, although game. See, that's that. And I think that's a great place to say it, the coaching answer, right? Or the consulting answer is what? It depends.
It depends.
And it's all about context. So, I mean, and you have to have grace with folks to do that. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I'm gonna drop you into the place, and then we'll come and jam for a second after. So thank you so much
Cool.
for hanging in here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Wow, I love that conversation. I am so happy to have more in the future and to talk with Dan. Haha, you're not going to get to talk with Dan in the back room. I am. So, with that, I thank you for the precious gift of your time and attention. And hey, be more purple.